Hey everyone, and welcome to our live session on YouTube here today. This is the eighth video on the mini series on machine learning and artificial intelligence taken up here by Quant Masters. And in this particular video, we're going to take a look at career opportunities with machine learning. So far, just to point out, if this is the first video that you're stumbling upon, we have already provided around 7 videos on what exactly is, let's say, artificial intelligence, machine learning, active learning, deep learning, transfer learning, how important statistics is, and what kind of programming languages to use, and so on. We've already taken videos, we've already taken up a few videos on these. In this session, however, we're going to take a look at what career opportunities could you possibly pursue? What could be the possible opportunities that you can have if you go through the domain of machine learning? So let's start with it. So before we begin, one of the most common designation we often see is something called machine learning engineer. Now we're going to take a look at a few very common career opportunities with machine learning, and I will also give you an idea of how to get into these careers. And just to note, please remember these career opportunities are the highest paid compared to computer science industry standards as of today. Even in end of 2021, machine learning and artificial intelligence is the highest paid domain when it comes down to this. So let's take a look at this. To begin with, the first thing that you need to know, when you talk about machine learning engineer, each job will have its own roles. Each job will have its own description. If you match those roles, if you like those roles, you can go ahead for that job profile. So we're going to take a look at these job opportunities. What are the job roles? What would you need to do in order to be prepared for that job? So let's start with the first one. A machine learning engineer is involved everywhere, from the creation of machine learning models, that is developing machine learning models, or obtaining data, applying machine learning techniques for certain real world applications, review the code, bring it to production, that is put it online for any purpose, be in charge of the entire life cycle. This is what I mean. It will be everywhere. Initially identifying what is the data that is required, how do we obtain the data, what are the experiments that we need to do, what should we develop, what should we deploy, monitoring and maintenance, and solving issues. Everything you will be involved in. So from obtaining data to creating your own machine learning models to deploying it as well. So machine learning engineer doesn't often communicate with clients. Whenever you read machine learning engineer, you can immediately realize and understand that most often than not, compared to the next job designation, I'm telling comparatively, right? Some companies may have slight difference. So compared to the next job designation, you're not going to be in charge of meeting clients and getting information. There are other people in the company whose main job is to go ahead and meet clients and everyone. Your main job will be to get the data that is provided to you and use that data in order to create your own machine learning model and deploy it on the web or wherever the way the client requires. And with that deployment, you will be able to read, realize, and analyze what are the outputs. In other words, you're able to derive insights. So what's the point of machine learning? To get valuable knowledge, right? There's so many machine learning algorithms going on for COVID and everything. What's the purpose of it? The purpose is to get insights, knowledge of whether some, let's say, lockdown should happen or some travel ban should occur or not. So all of these have a purpose. All of these have a particular insight along with it. So that's exactly what is the purpose of a machine learning engineer. So if you want to be a machine learning engineer, if you're good at Python, if you're good at developing machine learning models, reading data uh, to create your machine learning models and getting the output from it, then you're probably going to be very good at this. And of course, there's one small responsibility, as you can see, communicate complex process to business leaders. So if a client or stakeholder is there, you may be required to communicate with them at times as well. But the majority of the work will be towards the development. On the other hand, there's a different domain, there's a different designation, often termed as data scientist. Just to remind, machine learning engineer and data scientist are not same. Machine learning engineer is often developing your models and taking your review and bringing it into production and so on. Whereas data scientist's main work is to create the entire statistical model itself. A data scientist may also need to communicate with customers more, communicate with the clients more as well. So data scientist, as the name suggests, a person who's a scientist in data. In other words, if there's a client, you're able to understand what does the client require, what is the output requirement of the client, what is the input data that this output requires, is it useful, is it not. If it is, how are you going to create the model? How will you communicate to the client that there's extra input data required? All these are part of works as data scientists as well. So once you have gotten your communication done, the next work is to develop. Again, this is where it is very common between machine learning engineer and data scientist. You will be developing your data model here as well. You'll be developing your machine learning model here as well. The only difference is you're also in charge of getting the data, retrieving the data, analyzing the data, figuring out what data is useful, what data is not, creating the model. And you may work with a machine learning engineer who will be then building it into production. So this may happen. So these are just a couple of small examples, and these are the two main or most often seen points of view. So just to point out, whenever you talk about machine learning engineer, know that it's more about machine learning rather than anything else. You're not much in charge of getting to know the database, getting to work with the database, or getting to visualize heavily or so on. Not much. Whereas a data scientist, you're supposed to you're supposed to create your model, you're supposed to visualize it a little, you're supposed to get the data in the right format, you're supposed to communicate with the clients and so on. There's another modification of this designation that's often called as data analyst as well. Data analyst is very similar to data scientist. Again, all of these look like they're very similar, so I'm just going to explain this in short. You have these designations called data scientist, then you have a data analyst,